I wasn't looking for giants when I started this investigation. I was researching hospital architecture, specifically, the unusually tall ceilings in certain Eastern European medical facilities built between 1840 and 1890, 14-foot ceilings, 10-foot doorways, corridors wide enough to drive a carriage through. The textbook said ventilation, miasma theory, Victorian air quality concerns. But when I mapped 23 of these hospitals across 6 countries, they formed a corridor, a route, as if someone or something was expected to travel through. Then I found the requisition form. Tallinn, January 1897. A request for a bed frame of extended dimension, reinforced supports, and acoustic dampening for patient comfort and privacy of examination. Acoustic dampening, they weren't worried about noise getting in. They were worried about what might be heard getting out. The patient arrived on January 9th. He died on January 26th, 17 days. And in those 17 days, he told his doctors something so disturbing that they burned every page of notes they had written. I've spent 2 years trying to reconstruct what he said. I think I finally understand why they wanted it erased. His name, depending on which surviving document you trust, was either Alexander Volkov or Alexander Volkov, or in one brief mention in a private letter that surfaced in an Estonian estate sale in 2019, simply the Russian. His bones were not diseased. His proportions were not distorted. By every account that survived the burning, he was simply, impossibly, a very large human being. He was also, by every account, completely sane, and what he told his doctors in the 17 days before his death was so disturbing, so systematically impossible, that they did something physicians almost never do. They stopped writing it down. I didn't find him in a conspiracy forum. I didn't stumble across his name in some alternative history database. I found him the way you find most erased things, by accident, in the margins of something else entirely. I was researching 19th century hospital architecture. Specifically, the unusually tall ceiling heights in certain Eastern European medical facilities built between 1840 and 1890. It seemed like an innocent question. Why would hospitals need 14-foot ceilings? Ventilation theory, the textbook said. Miasma concerns. The belief that illness rose and needed room to disperse. Reasonable. Except the pattern didn't hold. Some hospitals had standard ceilings. Others had extraordinary heights. And when I mapped them, 23 facilities, across Russia, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, the tall ceiling hospitals clustered. They formed a rough corridor, a route, as if they were expecting someone to travel through. The first letter came from a retired archivist in Tartu. She had seen my inquiry posted in a professional forum and wanted to help. "You should look at the Revel Medical Society correspondence," she wrote, specifically the winter of 1896, 1897. There are references to a special patient and requisitions for modified equipment, beds, doorways. The society requested funding for architectural modifications to accommodate someone they called the subject of unusual dimension. I assumed it was a tall man, an acromegaly case, perhaps, a medical curiosity. I found the requisition forms in a microfilm collection that had been digitized in 2008 and promptly forgotten. The request was straightforward. Funding for a bed frame of extended length, reinforced supports, modified doorway, and this is the detail that stopped me, acoustic dampening for patient comfort and privacy of examination. Acoustic dampening. They were worried about sound, about what might be heard. The funding was approved on January 3rd, 1897. The patient arrived on January 9th. He died on January 26th, 17 days. And in those 17 days, something happened that made an entire medical society agree to destroy their own records. I went to Tallinn in early spring, when the snow was melting and the old town smelled of wet stone and wood smoke. The medical society building still stands, converted now to private offices, but the wing where the special ward was constructed is gone, replaced in 1901 with a modern addition that was itself replaced in 1956. Layers of forgetting. I found Helena Tam through a local historical society. She was 83, sharp-eyed, and the granddaughter of a nurse who had worked at the medical society in the 1890s. "My grandmother never talked about her work," Helena said. "We sat in her apartment overlooking the old town, drinking tea from cups that had belonged to her great-grandmother. Nurses didn't then. It wasn't proper. But there was one story she told my mother, and my mother told me, and I've never known what to make of it." She was quiet for a long moment. "There was a patient, a very large patient. My grandmother said he filled the room just by lying there. She said when he spoke, you could feel it in your chest. Not loud, just deep. Deep, like stone settling." "Did she say what he talked about?" Helena set down her teacup. Her hands, I noticed, had begun to tremble. She said he talked about the time before the small people came, before the world was remade. She said he wept, not from pain, from grief. He wept for something that had been lost, and he said it was going to be lost again, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. She looked at me directly. The doctors wrote everything down. That's what my grandmother remembered most. They wrote constantly, pages and pages. And then, the night after he died, they burned it all. Every page. She helped carry the boxes to the furnace. She asked why. One of the doctors, she never forgot his name. Dr. Rebin, he said, because some things are too heavy for paper to hold. The connection to Riga emerged from a shipping manifest. In the surviving customs records, and I should note that these records were only preserved because a bureaucratic dispute in 1903 required them as evidence. There's a notation for January 8, 1897. A private medical transport. Origin St. Petersburg. Destination Revel. Tallinn. Cargo 1 patient living. Specialized equipment. Attending physician. The specialized equipment was listed. A stretcher of non-standard dimensions, cushioning material, restraints. But the attending physician's name was what mattered. Dr. Victor Kraus of the Imperial Academy of Sciences, St. Petersburg, seconded from the Riga Institute of Anatomical Studies. The Riga Institute still exists, absorbed now into the university system. Their archives from the 1890s were largely destroyed during the upheavals of the 20th century, wars, occupations, ideological purges, but some things survive in unexpected places. I found Dr. Kraus's personal correspondence in a private collection in Vienna. The family had emigrated in 1905, taking their papers with them. The letters had passed through generations, untranslated, unread, gathering dust in a cabinet that no one had opened since 1978. The collector who owned them let me photograph the relevant pages. I've had them translated once, he said. Years ago, a historian wanted to see them. He read the translations, returned the originals, and never contacted me again. When I asked what he'd found, he said some things are better left unfound. Dr. Kraus's letter to his wife, dated January 12, 1897. My dear Marta, I cannot describe what I have seen without fearing you will think me ill. The patient is real. He breathes. He speaks. His heart beats as ours do, only slower, deeper, as if counting a different kind of time. The measurements I have taken are accurate. I have verified them a dozen times, and yet they cannot be true. He is 8 feet and 7 inches in height. His proportions are not those of the afflicted giants I have studied. There is no pituitary deformation, no acromegaly. His bones are dense, his muscles developed, his organs, by auscultation, functioning normally. He is simply a human being of impossible scale. But it is not his body that disturbs me, Marta. It is what he says. He speaks of a world before ours, a world of his people. He says they built the great structures we attribute to ancient civilizations. He says they were here first, and we came after, and we were welcomed as children are welcomed. And then, something happened. He will not say what. He weeps when he tries. He says he is the last. He says there were others even a decade ago, but they are gone now. Taken, hidden. He alone remained free, and only because they thought he was already dead. I do not know what to believe, but I know what I have measured, and I know that everything I learned in medical school is either incomplete or false. The letter ends there. The next letter in the sequence, dated January 29th, 3 days after the patient died, contains only a single line. We have agreed never to speak of this again. It is safer for everyone. I am sorry, my love. Some knowledge is too expensive to keep. The Russian archives are difficult. Decades of regime changes, purges, and relocations have scattered documents across continents. But certain records were considered too bureaucratically important to destroy. Land surveys, property transfers, institutional budgets. It was in a land survey from 1894 that I found the first reference to the estate, Volkov Estate, located approximately 40 kilometers southeast of St. Petersburg. Recorded owner State Medical Authority. Purpose, specialized long-term care facility. Buildings, main house dimensions, unusual, auxiliary structures, enclosed grounds. The dimensions were annotated. Ceiling heights of 18 feet in the main residence, doorways of 10 feet, corridors of 12 feet width. For comparison, standard residential architecture of the period called for 8-foot ceilings and 6-foot doorways. The estate was decommissioned in 1897. The buildings were demolished in 1898. The land was transferred to military jurisdiction in 1899 and remains restricted to this day. I found a photograph. It exists in exactly one place, a private collection in Paris, acquired from a Russian émigré family in the 1920s. The photograph is undated, but clearly from the 1890s, based on photographic technique. It shows a building, large, institutional, surrounded by birch trees, with a figure standing in the doorway. The doorway, based on standard construction ratios, would have been approximately 10 feet tall. The figure's head nearly touches the frame. The photograph is damaged. The figure's face is obscured by a chemical stain that may or may not be deliberate, but the proportions are unmistakable. The hands, the shoulders, the way the body fills the space. I stared at that photograph for a very long time. The Imperial Academy of Sciences maintained meticulous records of unusual medical cases. Giants, dwarves, conjoined twins, individuals with rare conditions, all were documented, studied, published. The Academy took pride in its scientific rigor. But there is a gap. Between 1889 and 1897, the Academy's records show a dramatic decrease in documented cases of gigantism. Not a decrease in population. The Russian Empire was vast, and statistical fluctuation would be minimal, but a decrease in documentation. Cases that should have been reported weren't. Subjects who should have been studied vanished from the records. And then, in 1898, the documentation returns to normal levels, as if a door had closed and then reopened. I spoke with a medical historian in Moscow, a woman who had spent her career studying 19th century Russian medicine. She asked that I not use her name. "There are files I've never been able to access," she said. Classified files, in a medical, still classified, after more than a century. When I inquired, I was told they pertained to matters of state security, medical records. From the 1890s, what possible security concern could survive that long? She showed me something she had copied years ago, before the restrictions tightened. A single page from a committee meeting in 1897 discussing the disposition of certain research subjects following the closure of the Volkov facility. The language was bureaucratic, dry. Subjects to be relocated to approved facilities. Documentation to be consolidated. Public inquiries to be discouraged. But one line stood out. The primary subject has expired. Remains to be disposed of according to Protocol 7. Protocol 7. I've never been able to find a reference to Protocol 7 in any other document. It appears once in this context, and then vanishes. What do you do with remains that require a special protocol? What are you afraid they might reveal? Think about what it means to erase a person, not to kill them. That's almost simple, almost comprehensible. But to erase them, to remove every record of their existence, every photograph, every letter, every medical file and bureaucratic notation, to reach into history and pull out a thread so completely that the tapestry doesn't even show a gap. That requires coordination, time, and most of all, it requires a reason. No one goes to that much effort for a medical curiosity. No one burns archives and classifies files and demolishes buildings to hide a tall man with a pituitary condition. You only erase something that threatens to reveal a larger truth. You only erase a final witness. The connection to Berlin was unexpected. I was searching for any international correspondence related to the Revel case when I found a reference in the archives of the German Anthropological Society, a letter dated February 1897, from a Dr. Heinrich Müller to his colleagues, describing extraordinary reports from our Russian correspondents regarding a subject of unprecedented physical development. Dr. Müller wanted to examine the subject himself. He offered to travel to Russia. He proposed a joint study, a monograph, perhaps an exhibition. The reply, sent in March 1897, was brief. The subject is no longer available for study. We recommend you pursue other research interests. But Dr. Müller was persistent. His subsequent letters, preserved in the Society's archive, show an escalating frustration. He wrote to colleagues in St. Petersburg, in Riga, in Tallinn. He received the same response everywhere. The subject did not exist. No such patient had been treated. The Medical Society had no records of any unusual cases in January 1897. "They are lying," Müller wrote in his diary. "I have seen the correspondence. I have spoken with witnesses. Something happened in Revel, and they are lying about it." Müller died in 1903. His personal papers were donated to the Anthropological Society. Sometime between 1933 and 1945, the exact date is unclear. His file on the Russian subject was removed from the collection. The catalog entry still exists. The file does not. Vienna was the center of European medical science in the 1890s. If anything unusual occurred anywhere on the continent, Vienna would have heard about it. And they did. I found a reference in the personal diary of Dr. Franz Lehmann, a prominent Viennese physician who specialized in developmental abnormalities. His diary entry for March 14, 1897. Extraordinary letter from Kraus in Riga. He claims to have examined a living giant, not a pathological case. but a genuine specimen of unusual human development. 8 feet and more, proportional, healthy, cognitively intact, but the strangest part, Krause's says the subject made claims about human history that Krause cannot bring himself to repeat. Too disturbing, he writes, too systematic. The subject spoke of an older world, an older people, a deliberate reduction. The entry stops there. The next page has been removed with a razor. Someone, at some point in the past 127 years, decided that what Dr. Lehman wrote next should not survive. I found Mikhail Volkov, no relation to the patient, despite the similar name, in a small town outside St. Petersburg. He was 91 years old, the grandson of a man who had worked as a night watchman at the Volkov estate in the 1890s. My grandfather never stopped talking about it, Mikhail said. Even when they told him not to, even when the officials came and warned him. He said truth was heavier than fear. We sat in his kitchen drinking tea so strong, it was nearly black. His hands, when he lifted the cup, were steady. He said there were 3 of them, at first. When he started working there in 1891, 3 very large people, not patients exactly. More like guests who couldn't leave. The doctors came and went. The large one stayed. What happened to the other 2? One died in 1893. My grandfather helped dig the grave. He said it took 8 men and they dug for 2 days. The other one, Mikhail paused. The other one was taken away in 1895. A special train came, military. My grandfather wasn't allowed to watch, but he heard. He said there was screaming. Not from fear, from grief. The one who was left, the last one, he screamed for 3 days after they took the other one away. And the last one? The one who died in 1897? Mikhail looked at me for a long moment. My grandfather said he was tired of being alone, tired of watching everything end. He said the large one told him, near the end, "We built this world, and your people inherited it, and now you've forgotten us completely. That's what we wanted, in a way, to be forgotten. But not like this. Not erased. There's a difference between choosing to fade and being cut away." Did he say anything else? Any warning? Mikhail nodded slowly. He said when the last of us is gone, the small people will have no one to tell them what's coming. And what's coming is very old and very patient, and it doesn't forget the way you do. I asked Mikhail if he knew what that meant. He shook his head. My grandfather didn't know either. But he said, the way the large one said it, it wasn't a threat. It was a lament, like mourning something that hadn't happened yet. The Polish connection emerged through ecclesiastical records. Churches kept better records than governments, sometimes less susceptible to political purges, and the Catholic Church in particular had a long memory. In the archives of a Krakow diocese, I found a letter from a rural priest, dated August 1896, to his bishop. The priest had encountered something that troubled him deeply. "Your Excellency, I write to seek guidance on a matter of conscience. A traveler has passed through our village, a man of extraordinary stature, easily 8 feet or more. He stopped at our church and asked to pray. I welcomed him, as is proper. But what he said in confession, and I may say only this, without violating the seal, what he said in confession has shaken me. He spoke of sins committed against his people, not by him, by others. He spoke of a great crime still ongoing, and he said the church had been complicit. Not this church, perhaps, but the church of an older time. He asked forgiveness not for himself, but for us. I did not know what to say. He left the next morning, traveling east. He said he was going home to die. He said there was nowhere else Lafitte. The bishop's response, if it existed, has not survived. But the priest's parish register contains one additional notation. A donation received in August 1896 for the repair of the church roof from an anonymous benefactor. The donation was in gold. The priest noted that the coins were of unusual design, bearing no mark I recognized. Hungary had its own tradition of unusual beings. The folklore of the region speaks of the Oryasok, the giants who built the ancient hill fortresses before the Magyars arrived. Most scholars dismiss these as myth, but in the archives of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, there are records that complicate the dismissal. A survey conducted in 1879, examining the hill fortresses of Transdanubia, noted several anomalies. Doorways too large for standard human passage, steps too tall for normal legs, corridors too wide for any practical purpose. The surveyor's conclusion, evidence of ritual architecture, designed to impress rather than to function. But another surveyor, working in 1891, reached a different conclusion. His report was never officially published. I found a draft copy in a private collection. The dimensions of these structures are consistent, not exaggerated for effect but scaled for use by individuals of 8 to 10 feet in height. The wear patterns on the steps suggest regular passage by feet larger than any modern measurement. The doorways show signs of friction, at heights above 7 feet, as if beings of considerable stature passed through regularly. I do not propose that giants built these fortresses. I propose that they use them, and that they used them recently enough to leave traces of use that have not yet eroded. The surveyor, a man named Bela Farkas, disappeared from academic records after 1893. His position at the academy was terminated. His address was listed as unknown. His family, a wife and 2 children, emigrated to America in 1894. Why would a surveyor's report about old stones cause a man to flee the continent? I've read hundreds of accounts now. Testimonies, letters, journal entries, fragments. And what strikes me is not the claims themselves. Those can be dismissed, explained, rationalized away. What strikes me is the consistency of the emotion. Everyone who encountered these beings, if they existed, everyone who spoke with them, measured them, treated them, everyone who came close enough to hear what they said, came away changed. Not converted, not convinced. Changed. There's a difference. A changed person doesn't necessarily believe something new. A changed person has had a door opened, briefly, onto a room they didn't know existed. And even if they close the door, even if they wall it over and forget where it was, they know the room is still there. They know the house is larger than they thought. Prague has always been a city of secrets. In the archives of the old Austrian medical administration, I found records of a traveling specialist who visited the city in 1895. His specialty was listed as constitutional disorders of unusual presentation. His name was Dr. Victor Krause, the same Krause who would later oversee the death of the giant in Tallinn. In Prague, Krause consulted on 3 cases. The files are fragmentary, but certain details survive. All 3 patients were described as of unusual physical development. All 3 were transferred to specialized facilities in Russia. All 3 were listed as deceased within 2 years of transfer. I found a letter from one of the Prague physicians to a colleague in Vienna, dated 1896. Krause takes them all. Every one we identify. He says it is for their benefit, for proper study and care. But I have asked colleagues in Russia what happens to them, and no one knows. They vanish into that facility outside Petersburg, and they are never heard from again. I begin to think we are not studying them. I begin to think we are collecting them. The physician's next letter, 3 months later, contains a retraction. I was mistaken in my previous assessment. Dr. Krause's work is important and properly conducted. I will not speak of this matter again. What changed his mind in 3 months? Who changed it for him? The Ukrainian records are fragmentary but telling. In the Lviv district, there were oral traditions recorded by folklorists in the early 1900s of the Velitin, the Great Ones, who had lived in the mountains and gradually departed as the smaller people spread. The folklorists classified these as mythology, of course, but one of them, a man named Ihor Petrenko, added a personal note to his collection. I have interviewed an old woman who claims to have seen the last of the Velitin as a child. In approximately 1865, she said he came down from the mountains to trade, as they had always done. But his family was gone. His village was empty. He was the last, she said, and he didn't know where to go. She said he cried. She was 5 years old. She'd never seen a grown man cry before, let alone one as tall as a tree. She said he asked her father where the others had gone. Her father didn't know. No one knew. They had simply stopped coming. Petrenko's folkloric collection was published in 1909. This particular account was removed from subsequent editions. The reason, according to editorial notes from 1912, material judged unsuitable for inclusion. Source reliability questionable. An eyewitness account. A named source. A specific date. Judged unsuitable. The pattern becomes unmistakable when you map it. I documented 47 distinct accounts of unusually large human beings in Eastern Europe between 1850 and 1900. Of these, 31 involve individuals specifically described as 8 feet or taller, proportionally developed, cognitively intact. Of these 31, 23 were transferred to specialized facilities. 18 of those facilities have since been demolished. All records relating to 15 of those facilities have been lost, destroyed or classified. The remaining 8 involve individuals who died before transfer. Every single account follows the same trajectory: discovery, documentation, transfer, silence. And then, around 1897, right around the time the last patient died in Tallinn, the accounts simply stop. Not gradually, the way a population might decline, suddenly, completely. As if someone closed a book, the Ottoman records provide an unexpected perspective. The imperial archives, vast and complex, contain references to Devler, giants, that the Western sources lack. The Ottomans, it seems, were less committed to erasing what they found. A medical report from 1882, preserved in the Imperial Archive, describes the examination of a man of extraordinary dimensions, found living in a mountain village in eastern Anatolia. The examination was thorough, the measurements precise. Height, 2.67 meters, approximately 8 feet, 9, endicid, weight, estimated 180 ok's, approximately 500 pounds. Age, claimed to be 147 years. Assessed as elderly but indeterminate. The examining physician noted, the subject claims to be the last of a people who once lived throughout these mountains. He says they built the structures we attribute to ancient civilizations. He says they chose to diminish, to fade, to let the smaller people inherit. But he says something is changing now. Something is accelerating. He says he is being collected. The word in the original Turkish is tuplanır, being gathered, being collected. The report ends with a recommendation. The subject should be left alone as he posed no threat and claimed to be dying soon regardless. A marginal note, added in a different hand, subject departed village in 1884, destination unknown, rumors of Russian agents in the region. I found her in Helsinki. She was 94, the daughter of a Finnish physician who had trained in St. Petersburg in the 1890s. Her name was Aino, and she had waited 80 years to tell someone what her father had told her. He made me promise, she said. He made me promise to wait until everyone who might be hurt was dead. Until everyone who had made him promise to stay silent was dead. He said it would take a long time. He said these things always take longer than you expect. She served coffee in cups that had belonged to her grandmother. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. He was there, you understand. In Tallinn. In January 1897, he was a young doctor, just starting. They brought him in to assist. They said it was an unusual case. They didn't say how unusual. What did he see? He saw a man who was too large to be real. A man who should have been a monster, but wasn't. He was gentle, my father said. Gentle and sad. He knew he was dying. He said he had waited too long, hoping others would come, hoping he wasn't the last. But he was. He was the last. Did your father hear what he said? The warning, I know, closed her eyes. The last giant told them many things, about how his people had built the world, about how they had welcomed the smaller people, us, as guests, and then as inheritors, about how they had chosen to fade because the world was changing and they were too large for what it was becoming. He said it was their choice. A Giffey passing of responsibility. But there was something else. She opened her eyes. He said that when the last of them was gone, a balance would be broken. He said his people had been guardians, not protectors exactly, more like anchors. They held something in place just by existing. And when they were gone, what they held would begin to move again. Move. He said something very old was sleeping. Something from before even his people. Something that had been put to sleep a very long time ago. And he said the presence of his people, their weight, their mass, their existence, helped keep it sleeping. And when the last of them died, it would begin to wake. I sat with that for a long moment. Did he say what it was? Aino shook her head. He said names have power. He said to name it might accelerate its waking. But he said this. It remembers a world without small people. It remembers a world without light. It is patient. It has been patient for longer than your species has existed. And it will not stop being patient just because we are gone. It will simply begin. She looked at me directly. My father never forgot those words. He wrote them down in his personal code, in a notebook he kept locked. When he died, in 1962, I burned the notebook as he asked. But the words stayed. They've stayed with me for 80 years. Do you believe it? She was quiet for a long time. I believe my father saw something that changed him. I believe he heard something that frightened him for the rest of his life. Whether the dying man was telling the truth or speaking from delirium, she shrugged. Does it matter? The effect was the same. My father spent the rest of his life watching, waiting, looking for signs that something had begun. Did he find any? He found enough to stay frightened, enough to make me promise to keep this secret until the time was right. She looked toward the window. He said, I would know when the time was right. He said it would be when people started remembering, when the erasure began to fail. What do you do with a warning no one believes? Think about the Cassandra problem. She could see the future. She told everyone what was coming. No one listened, and Troy burned anyway. But now think about it from the other side. What if you received a warning so strange, so impossible, so contrary to everything you knew about the world, that believing it would require you to rebuild your entire understanding of reality? Would you believe it? Or would you do what the doctors in Tallinn did? Write it down, then burn the pages, and spend the rest of your life pretending you had never heard it? I keep thinking about those 17 days. The dying giant, speaking to doctors who could not believe him. The warning given and received and systematically erased. The weight of knowledge that no one wanted to carry. And I keep thinking, what if he was right? What if something is waking? The final location is the hardest to verify. According to multiple sources, the body of the last giant was not buried. It was transported, under heavy guard in the middle of the night, in January 1897, to a location in northern Russia. A place where the ground is frozen year-round. A place where things can be preserved. I found a reference in a Soviet-era document from 1934, a survey of strategic resources in the Kola Peninsula. Among the facilities listed, Storage Facility 7, contents classified, access restricted, original construction, pre-revolutionary, acquired 1918. Storage Facility 7 appears in no other documents I've been able to find. Its location is not specified. Its purpose is not described. But a former Soviet archivist, now living in Germany, told me something interesting. He said that in the 1980s, when he was cataloging old files for potential declassification, he came across a reference to a facility in the Kola Peninsula that contained biological specimens of historical significance, unsuitable for study or display. He requested access. His request was denied. He was told the facility didn't exist. But I saw the file, he said. I held it in my hands. I saw the coordinates. And I saw one notation handwritten in the margin that I've never forgotten. The sleeper must not be disturbed. He assumed, at the time, it was a crude joke. He's not so sure anymore. I went to the Kola Peninsula, not to the facility that would be impossible, assuming it exists at all, but to the region, to feel the ground, to breathe the air, to understand what kind of place would be chosen for such a purpose. The journey took 3 days. Train from St. Petersburg to Murmansk, car from Murmansk into the interior. Then walking, through snow that reached my thighs, through forests that seemed to absorb sound, through a landscape so vast and empty that I felt, for the first time in my life, genuinely small. The cold was absolute, not hostile, just complete. The air hurt to breathe. The light, even at midday, was thin and gray. I found a village, if you could call it that. 12 houses. A church without a people who had lived there for generations, who knew the land the way you know your own hands. An old woman agreed to speak with me. She was 70, maybe 80. Hard to tell. The North ages people differently. You're looking for the giant's grave, she said. Not a question. I hadn't told her what I was looking for. Others have come, she said. Over the years, they always ask the same questions. They never find anything. You won't either. Why not? Because it's not a grave. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much winter. A grave is where you put someone to let them rest. This is where they put him to keep him. There's a difference. Keep him? From what? She shook her head. Not from. For. They're keeping him for something, when the time comes, when it's needed. When what's needed? But she wouldn't say anything more. She made tea. She talked about the weather, about the fishing, about her grandchildren who had moved to the city. And when I left, she said one thing that has stayed with me. The old ones are never really gone. They're just waiting. Everything waits. Here, the land waits. The ice waits. The dark waits. And somewhere, under all that waiting, something very large is dreaming. Whether it dreams of waking or staying asleep, she shrugged. That's the question, isn't it? After 2 years of research, I have more questions than answers. First, who were these beings? Were they human, in the way we understand human? Were they something else? The measurements suggest biological reality. They ate, they slept, they aged, they died, but the claims they made suggest a history we have no record of, a presence we have systematically forgotten. Second, why were they collected? The pattern is too consistent to be coincidental. Someone, some institution, was gathering these individuals, tracking them, transferring them, and then when the last one died, stopping. What was the purpose? Study? Containment? Something else? Third, what happened to the documentation? The burning of records? The destruction of facilities? The classification of files? This wasn't accidental. This was systematic. Who ordered it? Why? What were they afraid would be discovered? The last Tartarian giant died in 1897. His name was probably Alexander. He was probably between 8 and 9 feet tall. He was probably alone for the last years of his life, the final survivor of a people we have almost completely forgotten. And in the 17 days before his death, he gave a warning that his doctors heard, documented, and then burned. What was the warning? That something was held in place by the presence of his people. That something very old was sleeping. That the death of the last giant would begin a process. Not immediate, not dramatic, but inevitable. A slow waking, a gradual movement, a return of something that had been kept at bay for longer than human history can measure. I don't know if it's true, but I know this. The doctors believed something. They believed it enough to burn their notes. They believed it enough to demolish buildings and classify records and spend their lives in silence. They believed it enough to be afraid. And I know this, in the 127 years since that death, something has been changing. Something subtle, something hard to name, a gradual acceleration, a creeping unease, a sense shared by millions who cannot articulate it, that the ground beneath us is less stable than we thought. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe the warning was the fever dream of a dying man, and the doctor's reaction was simple embarrassment, and the suppression was just institutional caution. Or maybe the last giant knew something we've forgotten. Maybe he was telling the truth. And maybe, somewhere in the frozen north, something very large has begun to stir. Not awake yet, not moving yet, but no longer entirely asleep. The old woman in the village was right. Everything waits in places like that. The land waits, the ice waits, the dark waits. And somewhere, under all that waiting, something is dreaming. Whether it dreams of waking or staying asleep, that is the question that has haunted me since I first found Alexander's file. That is the question I cannot answer. That is the question I leave with you. The giants are gone. Whatever they held in place is no longer held, and the warning they gave, the warning that nobody believed, echoes still in burning archives and classified files and the memories of grandchildren who promised to remember. When the last of us is gone, the small people will have no one to tell them what's coming. And what's coming is very old and very patient, and it doesn't forget the way you do. The stairs still wait, the stones still remember, and now, perhaps, so do we.